I am lying in bed with him. He is asleep. I am lying in bed with him, my son. He is breathing regularly. I am lying in bed with him. He is asleep. I am lying in bed with him. He is asleep. I am lying in bed with him, my son. He is breathing regularly. I am lying in bed with him. He is asleep. I am lying in bed with him, my son. He is breathing regularly. I am staring at his birthday balloons. They have lost their lift. He is 5 years old. They lightly graze the ceiling. Stuck and strung up, not knowing where I will live. My son, does he know where I end and he begins? Taking the video. He says, Dodie, he's so young. You're holding him in the snow. He means Daddy. You can tell, stuck and strung up, not knowing where I will live. sun? Does he know where I end? And he begins. Will he think I don't want him? The sudden, uncontrollable note of fear heard in his mother's or his father's voice when he has strayed beyond in the sudden. Uncontrollable note of fear heard in his mother's voice, heard in his father's voice, when he has strayed beyond. The sudden, uncontrollable note of fear heard in his mother's or his father's voice. In the sudden, uncontrollable note of fear heard in his mother's or his father's voice when he has strayed beyond.
Hello, everyone. I'm Beth Morrison, creative producer of Beth Morrison Projects. To my left is our composer, Ted Hearne.
Hello.
And we're excited to be here with you tonight to talk about Place, which is a co-production and a co-commission with my company, Beth Morrison Projects, and the Los Angeles Philharmonic. The piece will premiere in LA on April 17th at Disney Hall, conducted by Gustavo Dudamel, and will tour shortly after that with the LA Phil's tour to the Barbican in London. And then it will come here next October to an illustrious, fabulous Brooklyn festival that we cannot yet announce. So we hope that you'll join us and follow the project into the fall and come with us on our journey here in Brooklyn. So we're gonna have a little conversation with Ted.
I just wanted
to
start by saying that we are working with some really great New York musicians here. I think there's 5 of you on stage, right? And then there's 2 singers. The piece actually is for 18 instruments. So it's sort of collaboration between 13 members of the LA Philharmonic, orchestral instruments, as well as people who do not play with the LA Philharmonic, who play non-classical instruments, sort of a band. So you see a lot of those people on stage now. And then we have 6 singers in the piece, and 2 of them here, Allison, Semmes, and Stephen Bradshaw, are with us tonight.
So this first conversation with Ted, we're going to talk a little bit, Ted, about kind of your journey as a composer and what this piece is. And then the next conversation will bring up our director and co-librettist, and we'll get a little bit more into Place. You are originally, well, not originally, but you lived in New York for quite a long time, and then you have just recently relocated to Los Angeles.
That's right. Yeah, well, I was born in Chicago, actually, so I grew up in the city of Chicago. And when I was 18, I went to college, moved to New York City, went to Manhattan School of Music, so lived up here, uptown, on the west side, of course. And and I lived in New York for 14 years. I moved to Brooklyn shortly after that, and stayed out here for 14 years. And then I moved to Los Angeles, to the city of Los Angeles, like 3 years ago.
So you're a recent transplant to Los Angeles, but I know that your heart often yearns for New York.
My heart yearns for New York, it's true.
So Place represents kind of an evolution in your journey of writing music theater and opera theater, vocal theater projects, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I always feel like your projects are always landing in a world that's hard to categorize. You're one of these composers that write fantastically out of the box, and the projects.
I'll take that as a compliment.
Yes, it's
okay,
a
sweet.
big compliment. And we've worked together, just so you all know. Ted and I have worked together since 2010 with his first opera theater project, Katrina Ballads, and then we did The Source together, which premiered at BAM and we toured to quite a few other cities and was heavily lauded in the press in the New York Times. And then this is our 3rd collaboration. So I've had the fun of being with you through all of these things. And it'd be fun to kind of talk to you a little bit about the first piece that you did, Katrina Ballads, in a sort of larger format,
Sure.
and then The Source, and then now Place, and how, what that journey has been for you along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Katrina Ballads is a piece that I wrote. I started it in 2006. We sort of premiered it in 2007, and then we did this sort of expanded production of it in 2010 with you, Beth. And that is a piece that is an hour long and sets primary source texts from the week following Hurricane Katrina that were heard on the national news media. So I was like sort of just out of college at that time, living in New York, and the feeling of like, well, utter shame at my sort of what was going on in my country at that time, and then sort of like helplessness or distance from what was going on with the images that I was seeing and the sort of the destruction that I was seeing on the Gulf Coast, and of course the failure of all sorts of government resources to be brought to bear at that time was a huge wake-up call for me, just as a person or a citizen, and I ended up sort of having a somewhat like cathartic experience just by like revisiting some of the texts that I heard from such a distant place, like sitting in, my life post-college in New York, and revisiting those texts and setting them to music, just singing all of them. So that's sort of what that piece is a collection of those songs.
And tell us a little bit about The Source, which was in 2014. We premiered at BAM.
Right, The Source is a piece that I sort of started thinking about and working on in 2010, 2011, and we premiered it in 2014, like you said. And that is a piece that is also about an hour long. It's also a similar piece in that it's like a sort of a pseudo-theatrical piece with a mixed chamber ensemble and singers. And that piece sets texts from the U.S. Army private Chelsea Manning, sets personal texts of hers that were released, that were published by Wired.com. She underwent internet chats with a hacker that she was confiding in, a friend who was in America.
And this was really the WikiLeaks scandal.
Right, and then Chelsea Manning, of course, was responsible for leaking this massive trove of government documents to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, which they then released with their media partners, New York Times, Der Spiegel, and The Guardian. And that was like at that time the biggest leak of classified information in U.S. history. So it set some texts by Chelsea Manning, and also set in the half of the piece is settings of some of the classified documents from the Department of Defense, which are now known as the Afghan War Diary and the Iraq War Logs, which is basically like a huge trove of military reports just detailing the day-to-day events of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
We'll talk about place in a little bit, but you can see the through line so far is that your work is often, well, not often, your work almost always is connected to political events that are happening, socially conscious themes. Can you talk a little bit about your choice to make that, to bring those elements into your work, and how you feel inspired, what inspires you to write?
Well, I mean, I think that, I'm trying to think of this quote. I think Nina Simone said something about an artist's role being to reflect the times, to reflect the times that she is in. And I know that for me, like, I think often about, what I can contribute in this world and what I can do. And I think that, like, I think a lot about the world that I live in, and I want the things that I create to reflect some of the questions that I have about this world. So I know that I was sort of inspired to write Katrina Ballads because of a lot of anger and frustration that I was feeling, and wanted to sort of reflect that. And with The Source, I mean, I had and still do have a ton of unanswered questions about these very ambiguous issues surrounding government secrecy and identity. And I think that the subject matter was so deep, it took a long time to like sort of get into text and write things and then discard them and write things and more and get deeper and deeper. But it's focused on questions that I have about this world that we live in, I think, I mean, and in a way I think like all art is political because it does derive from an artist making work in a time.
And sometimes it's not easy to present an audience with these topics, to sort of reflect our society back, to reflect our country, our choices, America's place in the world back. Do you ever feel any trepidation or I don't know, caution in how you approach things, or do you want to be sort of in your face with the projects? Like what?
No, not necessarily in your face. I mean, I think like I try to, as honestly as I can, bring to the work that I make the questions and the fears that I have in my own life and in my own life as a person in the greater world, and I think that the thing that I'm afraid of is sort of is trying to pretend like I know what anyone else's experience is, and try to prescribe onto an audience, like what they should feel, to manipulate them down a particular path that I myself can't, don't have the experience to really talk about or contribute to, and I can't say that it's always been a success, because like writing and making art is hard, and it's a learning, there's a learning curve to it.
Yeah, no doubt. And this is always like the moment that we're in right now is, I think, is maybe like the most vulnerable place in a project, right? So we're here.
Oh, this project as we're presenting it.
Yeah, right
Yeah,
now.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. So most of the music, almost all of the music, is complete in this project. And we have just come from some of us have just come from a workshop in LA where we were putting this piece together with theatrical elements. But of course, and I think Saul and Patricia will probably echo this. I don't think we really totally 100% know what this piece is either yet, and it's very exciting because we're finally putting all the pieces together. But we literally just came from that workshop.
Yeah.
So
we'll talk more about that in the next panel, but it is definitely, I think we all feel like, okay, we're sharing this, but we're still, like, it's a vulnerable place to be because we're still finding the thing. And it's been an amazing
But
week of
vulnerability
work.
is so fun, so.
Absolutely. So, Ted, tonight you will see Ted conduct. You will also hear Ted sing, and you're obviously hearing Ted's music. So, Ted, can you talk a little bit about the kind of artist that you are and all these things that you do and how they come together in this sort of beautiful package that is you and how they relate to each other?
Well, I'm a singer first, right? So I grew up singing in choir in Chicago, in the Chicago Children's Choir. For 12 years, I was in that group. It's an incredible group because they bring together children from around the city of Chicago, from all different neighborhoods and walks of life, and put them together in one musical ensemble. So that's sort of where I learned about music, and I think from a very early age, I connected there's a mission of justice in the group, which is about creating a better world through people with different experiences singing music together. And I think that just is what music or art meant to me, actually, when I was growing up. So I think about that really all the time and try to incorporate that into my work. And actually, this piece is very special to me. It's a really personal piece, as you might have guessed from the beginning that you heard here. And I have had the good fortune of bringing some people that I knew from choir back in the day, like Allison Semmes, for instance. I've known her since we were both in high school singing in choir, middle school even, singing together. So there's several vocalists in the project who actually come from that place. And I thought that was really important because this is a piece that reaches deep into my own background there, I think.
And talk a little bit about conducting your work and singing in the concert that you're conducting, and just like how you process that.
I'm a conductor also, and I've been performing. I perform with a band called Are We Who Are We, with Philip White, and I do a lot of vocal processing. We perform with a lot of vocal processing in that group. Incorporated some of that technology into this work as well.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that? That's definitely something that a lot of the audience probably hasn't heard, is the auto-tune on the voice. And you heard that in this last excerpt. The Source, which is the previous work that we did together, has a lot of that in it. This piece has maybe less of it, but you do hear it throughout.
Right.
Can you talk about what it is, how it works, and like why you use it in, like, what does it represent for you?
Sure. Well, in my band, Are We Who Are We, Philip White and I were experimenting with how we could use different types of vocal processing, we started working with this sort of interactive type of auto-tune, and so that's sort of evolved from project to project recently. But so in this piece, I'm playing a keyboard which triggers. Which tunes Stephen's voice to particular notes in time. And so you'll hear up to like 4 notes at the same time. And sometimes you'll hear one of them. I think it's an incredible sound. The mix of humanity and not humanity in that sound is really evocative for me. Used a lot in The Source. In The Source, mostly we used a type of autotune where you're hearing the tuned voice and the real voice at the same time. But here, in this piece, Stephen sings notes. Sometimes the notes are not in the chord that you hear at all. But the only thing that you're hearing through the speakers are the notes that I tell him to tune to. And I think about the autotune as sort of like a character. Certainly think about it metaphorically in the context of this piece a little bit. In that, like there's there's a distance that this person feels, and there is a struggle to relate, or a struggle to speak some of the words, or to understand some of the concepts that are being sung about. So in this song that you heard, Boundary, where Allison Semmes was singing, Stephen's actually singing the same notes as her, or the notes that belong in that harmony that the band is playing. That's what he's singing, but you can't really hear him. But you can hear the notes that I'm playing, which are, notes that are, dissonant, or the wrong notes, if you want to talk about it like that.
And it sort of comes in this kind of abrasive way. You have
abrasive? Who are you calling abrasive? No, I'm just kidding.
Like you have like Allison's like beautiful like lyrical thing, and then you have the autotune, and it feels like there's a little bit of a intentional clash of aesthetics there. Sure. What is that representing?
Well, I mean, I just think of it as distance, as, this text, we should talk about the text a little bit for this piece, but...
we'll talk about that.
These first two movements are texts that I put together, but the second one, Boundary, that text actually is drawn from James Baldwin. He does not know what the boundary is. So he doesn't know, and he is trying to know. And he's trying to relate. He's trying to sing along, and we could do that with these two voices clashing, but it's actually I think so effective to have that timbral distance represent an emotional or physical distance.
And let's just talk lastly a little bit about the sort of mix of styles that you have in this work, and that I think is a hallmark of the other two works that you've done as well. And kind of what are your influences that come into this sort of very eclectic styles that come together to form your very unique voice?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think just like most people here, I mean, I like a wide variety of music, and because of our access to music, we can shuffle between whatever we want at any time, right? So just broadly, I mean, I feel like I want my music to reflect that. But I also am super interested in the way that genre represents culture, and genre can conjure, musical genre can, and any stylistic signifier that that is a musical gesture that points to some type of music, or some music that you've heard before, or some culture, musical culture. Like, I'm really interested in the way those connections are made, and the way that our brains work. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's really interesting to set text that using multiple genres of music, because there's a jump that my brain makes when I hear gospel that's different from when I hear like a hip hop song, or when I hear classical music, right? I mean, there's I'm hearing the music that I know that reminds me of that genre, right? But it's still it's still abstract in the way that all music is abstract. Mm-hmm. So by setting very specific language next to or on top of music that conjures something abstract, I mean, I think that that process helps clear up some ways in which our brains are clogged a little bit in terms of finding new ways toward concepts or texts that we think we understand. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
You're like, nope.
I think we're ready for some more music. Great. Okay, everybody ready for some more music? All right.
Cool. This is a song called Maps. He comforts himself. He comforts dark.
He comforts himself. He comforts himself by singing under his breath. By singing under his breath. A child in the dark.
Like a map with no ocean, every time you think you're walking, you're just moving the ground.
He walks and halts to his speech. He walks and halts to his speech. The song is like a sketch. The song is like a sketch of a calming and a stabilizing.
This year I turned 36. Every time you think you're talking, you're just moving your mouth. This year I turned 36. Every time you think you're talking, you're just moving your mouth.
He skips as he sings. He skips as he sings. Calm and stable. Calm and stable. A center in the heart of chaos.
Maps, they don't love you like I love you. Maps, they don't love you like I love you. Maps, they don't love you like I love you.
Displacement bloop. There's no place like home. There's no place. There's no home. What about my son? 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 This may come as a surprise, but I miss you. I'd rather not talk about it. It makes me feel uncomfortable. I don't want to talk about history. I bet you don't. You don't want to talk. It's too convenient, too easy, too hard, too heavy, too dark, too tiring, too useless to think about. You have no place for memories unless they are your own. You're welcome here. Consider it home. You were never comfortable with intimacy. You were never comfortable with intimacy. You're in the business of you. You approached it abruptly. None of your reasons are true. Each planted flag a dagger through Caesar's mantle. A 2. You're in the business of you. None of your reasons are true. He left the public gardens. Privatized, the spirit hardens. Mother Nature begs your pardon. The tales you tell your children. This place is going cheap. This place is renting me. This place no coffee shop. This place got sugar crop. This place where father grew. This place was different time. This place will bury you. This place is in your mind. A glass bedroom over a shattered favela. It was an explosion. First in heart, now at hand. The guilt that I feel is freedom. Is it okay to say? Is it okay to say? Is it okay to say? Is it okay to say white supremacy in white spaces? Can we get to the bottom of this? Is it okay to say bottom? Is it okay to say? Is it okay to say your kind not welcome here? Is it okay to say welcome? Is it okay to say? Is it okay to say? Is it okay to say? Am I okay? 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 Is it okay to say I did not make these rules? Is it okay to say sorry and do it anyway? Is it okay? Is it okay? Is it okay? Is it okay to let some anger show, even if it has no place? Is it okay? 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 Is it okay?
Nobody wants to sit by me.
Just wanted my water, that's all.
All right, so joining us to Ted's left is Patricia McGregor, our director, and to her left is Saul Williams, our co-librettist. So let's get into this thing here called Place. Ted, let's start with you, since obviously the start of this project was in your brain. Tell us a little bit about what Place is.
Well, I mean, I think like a lot of the bigger projects that I've done, it sort of started at a place that it did not end up. But you know, I started thinking about this project when I moved to Fort Greene, and you know, seeing the clash of cultures there, and starting to think about, like, okay, well, how much is this land worth? How much is this space worth? And then what does this place mean to me culturally? What does it mean to someone else here culturally? What does it mean to all of us? And what are the differences there? What are the tensions? I think, like, you know, so in a way, it's a piece about gentrification, and that's definitely where I wanted to start. And it sort of it took a long route from there. I spoke to Saul Williams about writing a piece with me where we would put together a libretto that was something from me and then something from him that was, in a way, a response. And so that's what this piece came to be. So there's 3 parts to this work. The first part is words by me.
And is sort of autobiographical.
Is in many ways autobiographical, sure, and it also uses a lot of appropriated text, and then Saul read that and then responded with the second part of the piece. So the words for the second part were not begun until the words for the first part were finished, and then the third part we are currently finishing, and the text is drawn from some work of Saul's and a little bit of mine as well.
Saul, do you want to jump in here and
Sure.
Talk a little bit about what Place is to you?
Yeah, so as Ted said, I was approached to, you know, to think about gentrification, which is something, you know, it's a hot topic, and I really like the idea of Ted writing the first part and me being in a position of interrogating that text. And so that's exactly what I did. So as you see, Ted starts talking from a very personal space about his son and all this, and I kind of distanced myself from Ted the person and just thought more so about, you know, the construction of a piece, and thought about the people in neighborhoods who have a repetitive question that we also hear, you know, as a hot topic: what about my son? What about my son? Because of the heavy policing in the neighborhoods, and, you know, the sort of things that's happening in the criminal justice system, and because of gentrification, which brings about a higher amount of policing in neighborhoods, and the people who get singled out by the police are the same people that always get singled out by the police. What about my son? What about my son? What about my son? So I started, you know, playing around with a lot of different voices and ideas surrounding this idea of gentrification, but I couldn't think about that without also thinking about the natural flight of you know, the migration, and how that also naturally occurs. Like, both of my parents are born and raised in Brooklyn. My father's from Brownsville, and he grew up was born in Brownsville in the 40s and talked about Brownsville in the 40s, you know, when I was a kid in the 80s and 90s, and he'd tell me stories like, yeah, there used to be cows and goats and chickens going down these streets, and it changed, and he never used the word gentrification. He just said it's really changed from when I was, you know, and so I started thinking about all those different voices and what have you, and what became of interest to me was sort of this idea of displacement, you know, because I thought that it was also important, if we were to approach gentrification, to not only look at it from the gentrifier's perspective, right? So to think about other people in those neighborhoods, and so then we got into other things like white flight. Like, well, why did you guys leave in the first place? It used to be a large population of you here, and you left. Why did you leave? You know, and what's making you come back now? And so all these questions and playing around with all of these questions became a part of my process of that interrogative work that I was doing with the text that Ted presented me with, and so yeah.
Great. Patricia, let's bring you into the conversation. We were looking for exactly the right director, and we found you, and are thrilled to have you on the project. And we should say that the three of you are really the creators of this work, and you all have your individual things that you're doing, but you're also a hive mind together, kind of working this thing out. So what is place to you?
To me, place is an opportunity to have the hard conversations that often I feel like we're all trying to figure out how to get from here to there, and there is a place with more equity. There is a place with more inclusion. There is a place with more truth and trust. And in many ways, even just sitting right here, when Ted called me or emailed me and said, hey, I'm interested in doing this piece with Saul about these big ideas, but how do we deal with this personally? In many ways, place to me right now is starting with the first piece that Ted is saying, how do I root in a truth of where I am right now, very personally? And in many ways, Saul saying, yeah, but how does that relate to like everything this country has gone historically from the beginning of time? And somewhere in there is a piece of truth. You have to look at both perspectives to then say, okay, how do we honor both those truths? How do we honor that, Ted is a very intelligent, thoughtful artist who's also aware that him walking down the street is different than Saul walking down the street, even though they're both intelligent, thoughtful artists, just because of the color of their skin. That has to do with this place and linking all the way back. And if we can all get in a room together and tell those truths from a very personal place and ask some of those hard questions, hopefully we can collectively find some way to take at least a step forward. And I think I like that this piece asks more questions, and they're gnarly questions at times. I often think of work as a laboratory, and you have to really test the experiment rigorously. And I think the democracy of what happens in a room is going to reflect on what happens on stage. And sometimes we had to sit down and say, what does this really mean? Who am I in this question? Who are the singers in this question? What does it all really represent? And hopefully, if we are brave enough to dig deep and hopefully make something meaningful that represents prismatic truths, then we'll find a way to take some kind of step forward together. So I think that's where the experiment or the questions of place land for me right now.
Yeah, I think that we are trying to ask some hard questions, and I don't know that we're posing any answers. I think we're asking questions, and also I think it's interesting, to think about gentrification as it affects artists as well. We're all a part of that. We hear our stories amongst us of like how we've been pushed out of neighborhoods, because somebody else is coming in, developing it for the next people who occupy the space. And so this conversation that we're having is sometimes about race, sometimes about economic class, sometimes about other things, and they're sort of like all in there together. And I know, Saul, like one of the things I remember so clearly from our first workshop in the fall, was saying, okay, like, have the words white supremacy ever been uttered on the stage of Disney Hall?
It's a real question.
It's a real question, and it, I think we would be sort of the elephant in the room to say we're putting this piece on in institutions whose audiences are primarily white.
Well, yeah.
And so how has that come into the conversation that we're having?
Well, to me, it's the thing is that, like, for example, backstage we were talking about the Lenape, the original inhabitants of this island, of Manhattan Island, and what it means to acknowledge that beneath the ruins are older ruins, to acknowledge that even within the question of gentrification, we cannot sincerely address that without talking about colonialization, and if we talk about manifest destiny and this idea of this right to be at whatever place you have selected to be through time, you know, there's a history of that. There's a history of people being displaced. There's a history to this. And so, yeah, for me, it was very much about trying to, like, you know, you talk about these questions or honoring both sides. I wanted to break the binary and really have this quantum question that honors all sides. But although I'm not really into the idea of like, oh, let's honor everybody equally, I really wanted to, like, you know, it's like it started very simply with Ted in the center, and I pretty much approached it like, yeah, fuck that. Let's, you know, I mean, Ted is very generous in knowing that that's what I'm playing with, but you know, but he's doing that too. I mean, there's some beautiful texts that from Baldwin or whatever that you know, that Ted selected, that where he's raising questions and you know, himself, and I'm, you know, then going, yeah, that's all fine and dandy, you know, like he had, what was it called, exercises in wokeness at one point or something. There was a piece that you
Self-portrait and wokesmanship.
yeah, in wokesmanship, and so it was like, yeah, that's great, you know, but there's other parts of this story that need to be voiced. There's truths that are, you know, beneath these truths that have been there forever, that no one has taken the lid off of or unwrapped that mummy to say, yeah, that's right, actually. Well, actually, this land, this building was built on top of, this building was built on top of, and while we're celebrating this great architect, whether it's Gary or Frank Lloyd Wright, you know, it's like this building was built on top of, and if we're gonna talk about displacement and the movement of people and how that happens through time, what happens if we start there? Or if we don't start there, but we acknowledge that? And what does that bring to the question of, you know, what, because we always have this sense in our time that, oh, this is a pressing question now. This is a hot topic now. But there are other generations that have talked about it, perhaps using different words. And there's, you know, and then there's this great opportunity that we have to share this quantum, you know, visibility and all the information of this age and to play with it. So yeah, I have no idea what you were asking.
I'll also say what's interesting if we look fully back is that I think you both knew that you were going to write together, but we actually didn't know that it was going to be the form of this deeply personal thing first, and then this thing that exploded it. And in many ways, we were sharing articles and text and like just trying to figure out like what's the end. And then Ted and I sat down one day in Disney Hall and just recorded like an interview, because I'm always interested in, you know, I've worked with Anna Devere Smith, and she often says like, just speak to people. And in a fascinating way, after reading the transcript of the interview, Ted called me and said, I looked at that interview and saw how many times I said and And I've been thinking about this piece, and we've been reading about this piece, but we're still I'm trying to wrap my personal relationship and concepts that I can stand on. And, you know, so in many ways, process matters. Process reveals something, which I think revealed that you decided then to go very deep and very personal, because it could have gone a lot of different ways.
It's a brilliant place to start.
And
Absolutely.
I think
Well,
that's
I mean,
the
I think
honest place to start.
It was the only choice after a while. I mean, yeah, that was a huge moment for me, that interview. That was your idea to do that, and I'm so happy that you did, because, you know, I mean, I still don't really know how to talk about this piece yet. It's not done yet, but I still don't quite know. But like then, I don't know. I mean, there were that whenever you asked the question that was getting close to it, that's when I knew where I should look, because I just stuttered the whole time. It's not like I said anything, but there were a lot of more ums and uhs, you know, than just bullshit talk. So like I sort of started there, and then, you know, I just started to realize, like, I don't know, I mean, how can I mean, in the way this is a piece about, like, here we go. No, I mean, if it's a piece about how do I relate to somebody else, I mean, I really started focusing on like the boundary between me and you, or like what is it that, like, what is the experience that I have never had? And then it just got super personal, and just became like, well, I can't even figure out where that is, and where, like, you know, where my own narcissism ends with my own, you know, like, family, you know, and so how to write a piece that like deals with like your relationship in your neighborhood that existed so long before you, and you know that you're just like one person that dropped into Fort Greene because like I've got a great deal on a place right near the park and it was amazing. You know, like there's more to it than that. How to get there without, you know, just looking at like the people that are the most close to me. So that's sort of that's the direction that it took.
Yeah, and it's a lot, you know, about how am I as this white person functioning in this world, and how are
Absolutely.
you as this black or brown person functioning in this world, this neighborhood, and how do we exist in this place together, and how do we work this out? And I think that's you know, we're doing small things here. And just to say, yeah, this isn't autobiographical in some ways, but Ted's actually, you're hearing Ted sing tonight. Ted's actually not in the piece. The person who represents Ted in the piece is Steve, who is the other singer on stage. There are 5 other performers who are all people of color, and Steve represents Ted in the work. So in just a couple of minutes, let's talk about the process that we've sort of undertaken in this last week, which we just came back from a very intense workshop in Los Angeles. It was the first time that we had the piece on its feet. It was the ink was still drying on the manuscript. So let's just talk a little bit about what that process was. Maybe Patricia, you can kind of summarize a little bit of how that went this week.
Sure. So it started with the music. There were 2 days where the designer and I got together and we started looking at design concepts, but really the focus in many ways was almost exclusively the singers being able to absorb the music, because nothing else, all of the concepts that we're talking about can't happen if they don't feel comfortable in the music. And it's very complex at times, very delicate. Now it feels like I can jam to the songs now. It ends up feeling organic, but it's actually, if you look at it on the page, it's structurally takes a little bit of time so it started with that, which also spilled over for a couple of days, because then it's one thing to do that when you're sitting, and then it's another thing to do that when I say now cross down stage and look at someone. That changes things. The notes can go out of your head. One of my favorite moments that we discovered, there's a line, maps, they don't love you like I love you. And it's one thing to be sitting and singing that, and then all of a sudden we had Steve and Allison look at each other and sing that. And for Steve, with all the history he had, to take that out to her. And so I guess that's what the process was. First, for 2 days, just learning the music, figuring out some design elements, and then starting to fuse them and look for the opportunities for connection, for triggers, for just juxtapositions that would hopefully add a layer. Lee Brewer often talks about directing is mixing the tracks. So I feel like we had to learn the tracks, and then we start to mix them to hopefully make even more meaning out of the piece.
Do you guys want to weigh in on just how this week was for you and the process? Saul, do you want to talk about it?
Sure. Well, this week was huge for me because it was the first time that I heard the music that Ted composed around the text that I presented to him. And so I had some emotional moments actually too, because it's one thing to put these words on page, but as you were saying, Patricia, it's something else when you hear these words coming out of mouths. They come to life. Like it really takes on like greater and greater dimensions. And I mean, there are a few moments, I don't know if we're not going to hear all the music, but there were some moments that, like, wow, musically, with those words and those ideas circulating around them, I was really moved this week. And so beyond that, then I was sitting beside Patricia and watching Ted scramble with music and the singers and the performers and deflecting every time you guys try to throw me on stage, and
keep trying to get him up
still
there.
time.
He just
There's
isn't
still
going.
I'm like, no, I wanted to participate in this as someone who sits on this side.
Saul is a
of the
performance
table.
artist of his own, right?
Yeah, and I was like, yeah, now I get to see what it means to be like with the administrative side, this side of the creative team of and I see what it means. It means that we miss lunch. That when they go to lunch, we sit there and we discuss what just happened. And No, it was a really beautiful week for me. But I also see like what the challenges we face in order to like, break this thing open. And I felt like this week we got closer and closer, and I became really impressed with Patricia's work as, she takes this larger than life idea, because you're dealing with, a pretty huge ensemble of musicians, performers, designers, lighting, all this stuff, and it's you who's there conducting the conductor and everybody else. And so that was really inspiring for me, to see this disparate things all starting to take shape and come together. It's really,
I agree.
Really,
it was totally inspiring, and Patricia, your work was incredible. I mean, something that Patricia did was, leave so much space. I mean, these are huge issues, and also, Saul wrote these fantastic poems, but there's no characters in the piece, really. It's not like there's a story. There are, what is a narrative, right? There's like lots of elements of narrative in this piece, but it's not a story with characters traditionally. So we have these singers who are relaying the poetry. They didn't write the poetry, so they can't come at it from that kind of personal place. They're not playing a character because there is no character, and you could have totally just been like, this is what you're doing, and it's like that's opposite of what you're doing, right? You're saying like, you're really compelling them to find their own truth with that poem, and then bring it into their performance, and it's a really difficult thing at times, and it was really fantastic to see the singers grappling with the text, and at times they came to you and they were like really confused about like some decision you'd made, or they were like like grappling with it, and they wanted more information to be able to get into what they were doing, and at every turn you're all about openness and guidance and like turning it back on them. And in many ways, this process has been a lot of that, like turning it back on yourself, turning the reflection back on yourself. Like how are you part of this process? And I think it's been really valuable to see that. I didn't expect it to happen to that degree with the singers, and it's really cool.
Well, and hopefully, if we go, you did it in your piece. You're doing your piece. I feel like if we as artists aren't asking the questions from our own very personal place, then like, I don't know, you could just read an article, you could study some statistics, but like we've all got to put some skin in the game. I've got to really look at like, what does this mean to me? At one point, one of the singers, Josephine, was like, yeah, we have babies and we have lives and we got to be able to stand behind it. I said, absolutely. We've got to be able to stand behind. There's going to be things that we ask people to do or asked of us, but we've got to all be able to stand behind it. And the more people can personalize, even if we're asking you to push outside of your own experience a bit, the more you can personalize why you stand behind it, or like what makes you performing that different than somebody else performing that exact same piece of text, the more hopefully we'll break something open and we'll learn something. I always want to learn. I like to do pieces that scare me, that excite me and scare me, and I've already learned things from doing this piece, and hopefully we'll keep learning.
I think we're going to have to leave it there for the conversation. We're going to wrap up with some more music. Thank you to the Guggenheim for having us. It's been a joy to be able to share this work with you and converse a little bit with the artists. So we'll close with quite a bit more music, maybe 10 minutes more music, and we'll see you thereafter after we're done. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this piece has 6 singers in it, and for the first part, which is text that I wrote, the focus is really on Stephen Bradshaw, who's right in the front in sort of like a home office kind of configuration, and there's 4 other singers that sometimes come around him, sometimes sing from afar, but they're relaying that text. And there's a 6th singer who is off on stage right, doing her own thing, embodying the world outside. the second part starts. We heard the movement that we just heard with actual excerpts of Saul's voice, and then this song is the song that this woman that we've seen the entire time and not heard. This is the song that she sings. She's not here, so I'm going to sing it. This land was worth every war. My anger is beautiful, but my beauty is all the rage. My anger is beautiful, but my beauty is all the rage. My anger is beautiful, but my beauty is all the rage. My anger is beautiful, but my beauty is all the rage. I am rich as soil, I am a lakeside view, I am a highest hill, I am a funeral. I am rich as soil, I am a lakeside view, I am a highest hill, I am a funeral, and this land was worth every word. Is beautiful, but my beauty is all the rage. My anger is beautiful, but my beauty is all the rage. My anger is beautiful, but my beauty is all the rage. My anger is beautiful, but my beauty is all the rage. I am rich as soil, I am a lakeside view, I am a highest hill, I am a funeral. I am rich as soil, I am a lakeside view, I am a highest hill, I am a funeral, and this land was worth every war. This land was worth every word. And the land was mine, and the land is mine, and the land was mine, and the land is mine, and the land was mine, and the land is mine, and the land was mine, and the land is mine, and the land was, and the land is mine, and the land was mine, and the land is mine, and the land was mine, and the land is mine, and the land was mine, and the land is mine, and the land was. Thank you. Let's bring Steve and Allison out here. This one is called New Faces.
New faces.
Look around the world.
I look around the
See a lot of
world.
new faces. I look right down.
I look right down my
See
street.
a lot of new faces.
And there's a mall with churches where the stores would be. And we've got pop-up shops.
that give out water for free.
I look around, I see a lot of new faces. They give out God for free.
But they sell in places. I look around the world.
I look around the
See a lot of
world.
new faces. I look right down
I
my
look right down my
See
street.
a lot of new faces.
And there's a mall with churches where the stores would be. And we've got pop-up shops.
that give out water for free. I squat a piece of land on an abandoned street.
Where some abandoned dreams live off abandoned meat.
I look
I look
around. I see a
around.
lot of new faces.
I see a lot of new faces.
They give out God for free.
They give out God for free.
But they sell in places.
And parking spaces. This one's our final tune. You were never comfortable with this.
You are never comfortable with intimacy. You're in the business of you. You approached it abruptly. None of your reasons are true. Each planted flag, a dagger through Caesar's mantle. Et tu, et tu, et tu. You're in the business of you. None of your reasons are true. public gardens, privatize a speech.